Good afternoon, good evening again.
Welcome back. Who were with us this morning? Yeah.
or else, welcome. My name is Maurizio.
My name is Aya Benazzo. We're the directors of the film Where Olive Trees Weep. And we're delighted to have two very special guests with us today.
Yeah.
Dr. Gabor Maté, who doesn't need introductions, and
Ilan Pappé also doesn't need introduction,
right.
But we'll do it. We're going to read a brief bio to introduce you. Ilan Pappé is an Israeli historian and political scientist. He's a professor at the University of Exeter in the UK. He directs the university's European Center for Palestine Studies and co-directs the Center for Ethnopolitical Studies. As one of Israeli new historians, he offers an unconventional view of Israel's 1948 establishment. His works include The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine, The Biggest Prison on Earth, 10 Myths About Israel, and his new book was just released, Lobbying for Zionism Across the Atlantic. Thank you for your immense body of work and the angle you have been able to give us these years. Thank you so much. Thank you. It's an honor to have you with us.
Thank you.
So Ilan, it's great to speak with you. I know you're in Prague, so it's late in the evening for you there. You've been one of the seminal
no problem.
Sorry? You've been one of the seminal teachers in my own understanding of the history. I knew the broad outlines for a long time now, but your work and those of very few other historians in Israel has now completely changed, or should have changed, the conversation around the history of Israel-Palestine. You have used this phrase ahistorical, that most people's understanding of what's happened over there is ahistorical, not informed by history. What accounts for the worse than ignorance? Ignorance would actually be preferable to the fixed and rigid view of Israel as victim, Palestinians as aggressors, that dominates so much of the conversation and has for many, many decades. This ahistorical view, this utter, in which when October the 7th happens, it just seems like another pogrom against Jews in the absence of historical understanding. Give us the context for that ahistorical, anti-historical perspective that has gripped so many people's consciousness.
Yeah, thank you, Gabor. It's great to see you again and to be in conversation with you. Yes, I think it's a very good and apt description for the way a certain narrative that is presented as if it's an historical narrative is actually ahistorical and is meant to justify from the moment it was conceived first to justify homeland of indigenous native people, and then used to justify the dispossession of the people in various stages of that history. I think the power of that historical narrative has to do with the origins of the Zionist project. And not many people realize that Zionism began as an evangelical Christian project, which was totally theological and out of any connection to reality, but was very powerful as motive behind actions of, first of all, British imperialists in the end of the First World War to allow the creation of a Jewish state instead of Palestine, and then by American imperialists to sustain the project that the British had built after the First World War. So the first impulse was to say that the creation of a Jewish state is actually part of a divine scheme that is meant to bring back the Messiah, the resurrection of the dead, and so on. So from the very beginning, there was something totally almost mystical rather
I think
than logical. What really worked as well for a historical period in your very way in which settler colonial movements like Zionism perceived the homeland which they, or the new Europe that they wanted to build of the Europe that didn't want them. And even before they arrived at that Europe, and definitely in that new country, and it's definitely after the early stages of arriving there, they immediately erased the native indigenous people from the homeland in their imagination, even before they started physically removing them. I was always impressed by the early drawings of Zion painters, who in whose pictures you could see parts of Palestine that I was familiar with, that I knew on them were in the landscape. There were villages and little towns and so on, but they already don't appear in the painting. So they were already expunged from the reality. And I think this kind of settler colonial, first of all, perception that the land is empty, and then making sure that it is empty because the land wasn't empty, is part of this contributing to this totally denial of the existence of another people there, then also denying the expulsion itself. And when after so many years the native people reappear as a resistance movement, trying to deny the right to resist by terrorizing them, namely to frame them as terrorists. So it's the longevity of this project is important to understand. It's like 120 years by which you have all these stages, the stage that first perceives a land that has no people, then practically turning the land to a land without people by force. And then when it's an incomplete expulsion of the people, and the people fight back, you're using other means to continue this idea that there are not two legitimate people there, but there's only one people, and the others are some people who come from somewhere else, or are aliens, or in modern day language, terrorists.
You know, two things come up for me. One is that you've been called a revisionist historian, but actually, it's not like that. Like, there were Jewish voices right from the beginning who saw what was going on and who called it as it was happening and even before it happened. So that it's not like you have to discover the past all over again. There were people there all along who saw it and warned against it and talked about it. That's the first thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. In my new book, I bring quotes from. Sorry, the connection is a bit. So I don't know if you've completed the remark. I'm sorry about that.
Ilan, do you have any apps open or other windows? Maybe you can close those so they don't take.
No.
Okay.
So
Yeah, it's
I
just.
don't have any apps, I think, but I can turn off my phone. Maybe it's the one that closes, because I don't have any other apps on the computer.
Okay.
Let me try and turn off.
Zaya Maurizio, while we're waiting for Ilan to come back, I just wonder if this connection is poor. This is too important a conversation to have it sabotaged by a poor connection. Well, might it be an idea to rebook it for a time when Ilan could be in a place where there is a more secure connection? If it doesn't work out today, I mean, we'll try for him to come back, but if it
Yeah.
doesn't happen.
We'll do the
All
best.
right, I turned off my phone. It
Okay,
doesn't say that I have a poor connection. It says that you have poor connection.
okay,
I think my
okay,
connection is
okay,
quite strong.
okay.
I
You blame it on me.
Yeah.
Go ahead. I don't care.
No,
The other.
Okay.
I'm not blaming anyone, but this is a very strong internet network. So continue. I think Gabor, I think I got your question. Let me just repeat that there were already Jewish voices very early on that they
Yeah.
didn't go along with this narrative and this depiction, this ahistorical narrative, as we call it. Am I right? Did I get that right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So yes, definitely. I began to say that in my new book, I bring evidence for the early Jewish rejections of Zionism, especially in Britain, when it appeared, not only as a Christian project, but as a Jewish project, when Theodor Herzl, the founder of the Zionist movement, arrived twice or three times in London to try and convince the leadership of the Anglo-Jewish community to support Zionism. And they already then told him that there are two problems, and it's amazing how prophetic they were. And I'm talking about 1900 to 1902, the first 2 years of the 20th century. And they're saying, that two evils would be created by this kind of an idea of settling the Jews in Palestine. First of all, it would be a disaster for the people of Palestine itself, but it would also be a disaster for the Jews, because the claim is that the Jews are a distinct nation or a race. And this is exactly what the anti-Semitic discourse is, the way the anti-Semites frame
Yeah.
the Jews as a different race, and therefore they're not English, they're not British, they're not even American, and so on. And they warned that you will have this two double-edged kind of results or consequences later on in history. They were so perceptive, so focused in understanding, even before they saw what we also later saw, how it really unfolded on the ground. This is even before we fully understand the nature of the settler colonial project of Zionism. It's just understand it, philosophically and morally. They understood that this is something that is going to affect not just the people of Palestine, which was understandable, but also would have a very negative impact on the Jewish people outside of Palestine. And I must say they were right.
It's often struck me, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's almost like the Nazi definition of a Jew is the same as the Zionist definition of a Jew. And even to the point that, it's okay, I'm in a hotel here. Even to the point of, if it's one grandparent is Jewish, then you're Jewish kind of thing, It's remarkable to what extent the anti-Semites' definition of Jewry corresponds to the Zionist definition of what's being a Jew. This whole idea of a Jewish nation, it strikes me as such nonsense, because somebody can convert to Judaism tomorrow if it's accepted by the rabbis, and a week later they could be part of the Jewish nation. What kind of a nation can you convert to by changing your religion?
Absolutely. In the new book, I'm sort of following the debates within Jewish communities outside the early space in which Jewish Zionism developed. So they're bringing it to North Africa, to Jewish communities in North Africa. They're bringing it to the Jewish communities in the United States. And the reaction of people beginning was to say, we are not Jews who happen to find ourselves in America or in Morocco. we are Americans and Moroccans who happen to be Jewish, but we could have been Muslims or Christian, it doesn't matter. And the Zionist message is, no, you are Jews who happen to be in America, but this is, or Morocco or wherever, but this is not your homeland. This is not, and this is really something that is very alien at the beginning to many Jews before the Zionist idea is catching or getting more support because of the Holocaust later on. But I think that you're absolutely right that the similarity between an anti-Semitic trope that says Jews are a different race and Zionism that says Jews are a different race explains why until today we have these strong alliances between anti-Semites and Zionism. And from the very early on, it's very logical. Both movements, if you want, or both ideologies, don't want to see the Jews in Europe, and they don't even want to see the Jews in America. They want to see the Jews in one place in Palestine for different reasons, but it's the same end result, and that's where the uniformity of the perception of Judaism plays into the hands of the anti-Semites and Zionism that allegedly was an ideological movement that was meant to be the panacea, the remedy for anti-Semitism. I think contributes to anti-Semitism more than any other modern ideological movement in modern times.
You mentioned, quite apart from the obvious and tragic and horrific suffering that Zionism is inflicted on the Palestinians, from a strictly Jewish point of view, if we can talk about a strict Jewish point of view, this whole idea of creating the state so Jews can feel safe. I can't think of a single place in the world where it's less safe to be a Jew than in Israel. And Hannah Arendt back in 1942 said that it's madness to alienate the local population and to put your faith in foreign powers far away. Now, she was right. She was also wrong, because if they hadn't done that, they couldn't have created the state. They could only create the state by relying on foreign powers. But in the long term, I just think Zionism, I just wondering what your reaction is. I think Zionism will be seen by Jewish historians in a not too distant future as one of the greatest disasters in Jewish history for the Jewish people.
Yeah, I do agree with you. I think that Zionism as an ideology was not only, to put it in simple terms, bad news for the Palestinians, which of course it was, but I think it was bad news for the Jews as well. And we are living, to my mind, in an era where we are witnessing the beginning of the end of this project of imposition by force and with the help of external powers of a European Jewish state on a country which is Arab, which is part of the Muslim world, which is part of the Middle East, against the will of the people living there. Yes, it lasted for now more than 100 years. If I go back, it doesn't seem to work. It doesn't seem to work in terms of its economic viability. It doesn't seem to work as part of its social identity. There's no social cohesion. Judaism as nationalism has not gelled into a national identity. On the contrary, what we see is actually a kind of a cold civil war between the secular Jews and the religious Jews, because they don't agree about what does it mean to be a member of a Jewish state, or what is a Jewish state. And for many years, we thought that a common enemy would be the cement keeping these two camps together, where we see that even after the big trauma that they went through, the 7th of October, it did not create the unity. So there's a social implosion from within the Israeli Jewish society. As I pointed, economic vulnerability. The army doesn't seem to be able to defend as it always promised it would be. And if you take the United States out of the equation, as the financial, diplomatic, and political shield of Israel, which, by the way, is happening all over the Eastern Mediterranean. Syria is a failed state nowadays. Yemen is, Libya is. Israel, there was always a sense among Israelis that whatever transformations and processes they don't relate to them because they belong to Europe. Finding out actually that they are part of the Eastern Mediterranean, an area where the old idea of the nation state that was imposed by the colonialist powers after the First War is not working. There was failing nation state idea of Europe that created Syria, Jordan, Libya, Yemen, all these countries are disintegrating in front of our eyes, or becoming very, very unstable. And the Israelis are surprised that they are part of that process. Now, the reason for their weakness is different from the disintegration of Syria, but it's part of the same historical legacy. The Balfour Declaration was part of the post-First World War agreements that created the Arab nation states in Eastern Mediterranean. These particular states are failed states and are disintegrating in front of our eyes. We live in that epoch now. And I think what the Israelis refuse to see, that they are part of the crumbling down or the collapse of that particular colonialist structure that was built. And I think, like all these regimes, they become very fierce and brutal exactly because they cannot hold the things together. We remember the brutality of apartheid South Africa in its last days. This I think proves that this whole project was not only morally, to my mind, invalid, it was also not going to last. And I think we really are beginning to see the proof or the proofs or the manifestation on the ground for its collapse.
That leads me to talk about your next book, but before I do, I just have a personal question for you. You've been, your Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine came out in 2007. You've been talking about this for a long time now. You went through a personal transformation. You were brought up as a typical Israeli, served in the army, inculcated with the same ideology. At some point, you became allergic to it, and you developed a sense of curiosity of what actually really happened here through your contact with Palestinians and your investigation. Gideon Levy, who I know you know, and who's the magnificent journalist for Haaretz, talked about his sense of failure because he's been trying to wake up the Israelis for decades now to the reality of what they're doing and who they actually are. What was your subjective response, or what has been your subjective response after and since October the 7th? For me, it's the darkest days that I've lived through as an adult. I can't, as an infant in Hungary under the Nazis, those were darker days, I imagine personally. But as an adult, I can't think of a darker time. And not just because I'm Jewish, but because we're seeing something so horrible and so undeniable being denied and justified. So have you had a sense of futility or failure, or what has been your subjective response personally? Before I ask you more about the history, just what's it like for Ilan Pappé to witness all this stuff?
Because I've been an activist for so many years, I'm now 70 years old, there's some mechanism in me that does not allow even the darkest hour to be an hour of total despair. Probably my inclination to look at things in a wider historical perspective rather than in either the immediate past or the immediate future allows me, I think, to see also the dawn after the dark night, if you want, or use another metaphor, the light at the end of the tunnel. I don't deny the tunnel and I don't deny the dark night, and it depresses me and saddens me, and like so many other people, I'm aware every hour what goes on. So it's not out of not knowing the sheer inhumanity that is unfolding in front of our eyes, not only in the Gaza Strip, now also in the West Bank. But I really, and this is an analysis that I feel is not just emotional, but I think also even logical for me, that it is the kind of reaction that would bring in it eventually a better future. I really believe in it. Now,
Mm.
I find it very difficult personally to engage in this conversation, and as much as I can, with Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, which now is very difficult, which I used to do a lot before the 7th of October. But I have a lot of connections and I go often to the West Bank. I try to understand that I should be careful, because I'm talking to people that when I use abstractly saying, you know, the next 2 years will be awful, but afterwards I hope that something better is happening, that the next 2 years being awful for them is really a horrible scenario. And I try to be part of the activism in the world that tries, first of all, the emergency action, you know, to put a stop to the brutality. But unlike Gideon, I know Gideon for many years, and although we come from some similar German Jewish families with some background, I don't fall into this a trap. I think it's a trap of saying I failed in doing something and so on. I don't feel a failure, and I don't think that I've done everything I still can do. And I do believe very much, because of my context with the young Palestinian society, that this idea of mine, that in the medium term and in the long term, there is something better awaiting us, is not just wishful thinking. It's based on analysis. So I my heart is broken by what I see and
Yeah.
hear from my friends. I lost dear friends already in Gaza. I lost students in Gaza. But I don't think I don't want to allow myself to go into this state of despair, and I somehow feel responsibility not to generate it artificially, but genuinely to share with people that they are part of an historical process. By the way, not only as observers, Gabo. I keep telling people, you know, when I'm talking about the beginning of the end, I say, you know, don't be deterministic. Whether you're sitting in your armchair and watching this process of
Yeah.
collapse happening, you
Yeah.
can be part of it,
Yeah.
and you can be part of an attempt to make it more positive, because collapse can be disaster and disastrous, or it can really open the way for something better. And it depends on people. It's not, we're not watching it on a screen. We are part of the plot. So that's my kind of, it really keeps me together in this kind of thing. And I think I'm running like a headless chicken now from one capital to the other, because people feel that, contrary to some other activists that they meet, I leave the audiences with hope. That's the rewards I get from my talks. And I always hope that this is not an imposter syndrome, you know, that I'm just creating false hope.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I don't believe so, because I really also base it on analysis and not just wishful thinking, or, you know, my natural inclination to be an optimist.